Welcome to Off the Wire, the podcast that helps you curb your cybersecurity risk and tackle technology challenges. I'm Tanner and I'm joined by Anthony. We're two IT executives with 35 years of experience. Let's start the show. So welcome back to Off the Wire. Today we're tackling a big decision that's really hit both small, medium, and large businesses, and that is, should you stick with VMware or should you explore the various alternatives that are out there? Before we jump into that topic, I just want to ask you, if you're not already subscribed, to go ahead and subscribe on whatever platform you're consuming our podcast on, whether that's YouTube or any of the other audio options. Really appreciate that. If you also have a chance to leave us a review, that helps out the podcast quite a bit. And if you find value in the discussion today, I would just ask you if you share it with a colleague or a friend that you think could also benefit from what we're talking about. So how did we get here? Well, VMware was recently purchased by Broadcom. We all know that if we haven't been living under a rock for the last little bit. And there was a little bit of a calm for a little while. Everyone was just worried. And then, of course, they had a right to be worried. Broadcom started making some pretty drastic changes, going from a perpetual license model to a model that you had to pay for on, kind of a leasing or a software as a service kind of model. And obviously, with that, they also adjusted their pricing. And for some people, that was a rather large jump. Some of those even saw 10x increase in price. So obviously, that prompted a lot of people to do some soul searching and some internal evaluation to see if they were still kind of on the right track. We have two fantastic guests that we're going to introduce here in a minute. One of those is loyal to VMware and continuing to stay on VMware. One of those has moved on to greener or at least different pastures. What we're going to do is kind of unpack that, right? Kind of hear about where they got to where they're at today, the history of virtualization at their co-op, and then also kind of like pros and cons of the decision they made, any kind of gotchas, and overall just how they feel with the decision that they went through. So we're going to go ahead and jump in.
So today with us, we've got Devin Costa from Jones Onslow EMC. He's just north of me. They are in Jacksonville, North Carolina, headquarters in Jacksonville, North Carolina, and serve several counties outside of Onslow County. And then we have Ben Hubbard. He's with Flit EMC, and they're in the Georgia area. With Ben's co-op, I'm friends with someone in his IT department, and we've had some internal discussions after the Broadcom acquisition, and just kind of discussing what we're doing, what our thoughts were. And I know one thing that Todd told me. He said Ben was instrumental in the decision, and their decision was to stay with VMware. And we'll go into that here in a second. And then with Devin, I remember after people were complaining about the raises, I knew he was on Nutanix. I remember messaging Devin. I said, "I bet you're happy see us all squirming over here with VMware." And I'm sure he's not. He's a great guy, but I wouldn't have mind being in his shoes when I was worried about it myself, at least initially. And anyways, we'll turn it over to Ben. And I really just Ben. It's my understanding you guys went to VMware probably about 2012. I guess I just wanted you to discuss some of the pros and cons you've seen with VMware since you guys have been utilizing it, and then also talk about after the Broadcom acquisition, or just any point, have you guys entertained or kicked the can around about maybe looking at another virtualization environment? And if you have, why? And if you haven't, I would appreciate you to share why you haven't looked at anything else.
Yeah, 2012. I had not joined the IT department at Flint at that point, so I wasn't there when we actually did the adoption of VMware virtualization technology altogether, because we really hadn't been running anything up to that point. I know the team went through and did a couple of, probably 12 or 15 P2V, physical to virtual conversions, and they kind of built it up from there. I came on board with the team in 2013. Everything was pretty much fully in place by that point. But of course, our decision to virtualize was based on anything else. Just like anybody else, this is where technology is heading. This is going to allow us to have more reliable resources. The benefits of virtualization are pretty evident by today's standards, and back then it was probably a little harder sell. We managed to convince the C-level management board that this was a good investment. So we jumped in. And so we've been there ever since. Naturally, we do evaluate other options. I mean, like I said, Broadcom is kind of a dirty word depending on who you ask, and so it certainly scared us. When it came out, we have looked at Nutanix in the past, and we tried our hand at a VDI, a virtual desktop environment, and ran with it for a little while. It didn't really fit our business model, didn't fit our end users, and so we kept it along as sort of just a backup. But we've looked at Nutanix, and it looks like it's a great product. We just didn't want to upend our system when we were looking at it from a VDI standpoint. We didn't have to purchase new hardware and upend our whole environment. So we chose to stay with VMware at that point. We certainly took another look too when we heard about the Broadcom acquisition. But ultimately, we made a decision to stay.
Ben, I'm just curious, and if you can't share it, that's fine. But do you know about what percentage base the increase was after Broadcom?
Yeah, I can tell you it was probably a sevenfold increase. I mean, it was significant.
Okay.
Significant. We used to pay maintenance on VMware licensing, pay our licensing maintenance fees for like a 3-year term. You know, I calculated it out. After when our license has expired this past year in 24, and so when we had to re up on the yearly per core model, it ended up being probably close to a sevenfold increase, and it it hurt, and it actually altered my decision on some of the new data center hardware since we're having to pay per core.
Hmm.
I was going to kind of go gung ho and overbuild my system a little bit, but since I'm having to pay licensing per core, it did make me back off a little bit on that.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I mean, we recently just bought servers, but I didn't want to up the amount of cores. And it's not just VMware, it's just all the other licensing. And for the most part, I think most of us find ourselves, if anything, any constraint we have, it's memory, not CPU. But that's
Right.
definitely something we all have to weigh in on. If you don't mind, I'd just be a little curious about your setup. Like, do you have multiple instances? Like, do you have like a primary data center and a backup? And I'm just curious, like, how many servers do you have virtualized in your environment roughly?
Well, so yeah, we do have a primary and a secondary. So our primary data center, our server environment runs on 4 Dell PowerEdge servers, and right now we're running with a NetApp AFF series storage array, and then a NetApp E series for backup, and then we do replicate that system to a secondary data center at our headquarters. So we move the backups, run replication over. Our secondary data center used to run some servers of its own, but now it it runs a side by side instance of our SCADA system. So we have a true active active with a SCADA system that runs in both data centers. And then we do have some quality of life improvements like domain controllers and print servers that run at our primary data center just to keep things off of the wide area network and help things run faster at those local office. But yeah, really, it's our secondary data centers. Really, there's 3 servers, there's 3 host servers, and an older NetApp array that powers that data center. And then, like I said, we do have 2 PowerEdge servers that run a virtual desktop environment. However, we chose not to renew the Horizon licensing there, so that's kind of going by the wayside.
Yeah. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm definitely biased in this situation. I'm gonna defend their decision. I do think this is I don't think a lot of people are gonna wanna hear this. I do think VMware was underpricing themselves. I I I don't know that anyone's gonna agree with me, but I'm just gonna throw that out there. And,
Yeah.
I haven't really been able to put my finger on it. I'm assuming it is people that are using the more advanced features of VMware had the higher increase because ours was roughly it was probably about I would say it was a 20% increase to what we were paying before, and I've heard up to 10x. So I mean, I'm not a salesperson. I don't sell VMware, so I can't put my finger on it, but it does seem the larger organizations that have a more advanced VMware environment that have more of their higher end licensing do seem to be paying more. Moving on to Devin over at Jones Onslow. So I guess I'd be curious of when you guys went to Nutanix, and if you could tell us a little bit about your infrastructure and just kind of like how many data centers you have and like your replication and stuff like that with Nutanix. And if you don't mind, just briefly give a description of what Nutanix is.
Yeah. So first off, appreciate you guys having me. Thanks for letting us join this. We use Nutanix, which is a solution. When I started at Jones Onslow, they were actually still on a 3-tier architecture. And basically, what a hyperconverged system is it takes your storage, it takes your compute, it takes your network and puts it all into one pizza box, right? Puts it in one server. So you don't have to have all the legacy storage arrays. You don't have to have the fiber network infrastructure to go in between the servers and the storage arrays. It's all done in itself. So it's really takes up a lot less space. When I got there, the storage array was one rack by itself. When we switched over to VMware, we were running VMware in the Nutanix environment. We utilized ESXi hosts within that platform. We have a couple different clusters today. And so when I say clusters, it's a couple different hosts that reside together in order to run an application, right? So and we actually still do have a little bit of VMware still in our environment, simply because the applications that we have won't run on the hypervisor for Nutanix, which is AHV. Our scenario was a little bit different because we've been on Nutanix now for about 7 years. We started out running on Cisco hardware. It was coming time to replace that hardware just from a support perspective, and it was outdated. So working with our vendor, we made the decision to go with Nutanix hardware, and have had no complaints with that at all. And with that, we were able to look at the pricing advantage of switching over to AHV during that process. I would say probably our entire Meridian environment, our OMS environment, and a couple of our production servers that we utilize from an IT perspective and other applications run on AHV. And then, as I said earlier, we have a couple that still run on ESXi environment, but we're hoping to go to some cloud solutions for some of that stuff, and we'll be able to transfer that over as well. So nothing against VMware. It was, the cost was very significant in order to, renew that. And so we had a test environment that we were running AHV on. Honestly, I'm used to VMware. That's what everybody's used to, right? Because that's what they ran on. So, I mean, learning and understanding Nutanix Prism and Prism Central and all that stuff does take a little bit. It's a little bit of a learning curve, but you can do everything inside of that you can do within VMware and vCenter, right? So we do have another location. We have our corporate office in Jacksonville, North Carolina, and then we have another location in Sneads Ferry, North Carolina, which is about 26 miles closer to the ocean. And we do have a Nutanix cluster down there that we can replicate machines to in the event that we need to. We run Rubrik for our backup environment. So we have a Rubrik brick in the Jacksonville location, a Rubrik brick in Sneads Ferry, and then I think it was last year, year before last, we actually made the jump to Rubrik Cloud Vault out in the cloud. So one of the things that we're working very heavily on, and it's interesting because it's kind of going back to VMware a little bit, but we're looking at using Azure VMware services out in the cloud, right? So that way we can kind of utilize that as a DR strategy to be able to move things out there. But we've been satisfied with it. VMware's been great, and that's when everything started. And everybody's so used to that, and it works great. You had mentioned VDI environment. We actually did transfer over to the VDI environment using Horizon as well. And we're still on that right now. I will say that, when COVID hit, we were very lucky to have that in place because as we needed to move member service representatives to work remotely, that made it very, very easy to be able to do that. We were able to accomplish that very quickly. But that's kind of where we stand right now.
So Ben, I was thinking when you said 7x, that hit pretty hard for me. For us, it actually wasn't even a 2x. It was like a 60% increase, so about a 1.6 or so. But walk us through what went through your guys' mind when you got that back and you were like, "Whoa!" And then, what was your process like from getting that to making your decision?
Well, yeah. So when we got the number back, it was very much a whoa, because we had been paying, like I said, 3-year licensing, and the price came back for one. It was very jarring. But I had expected it because we had heard a lot of the horror stories about the huge increases. It was one of those things like we hoped not, but it was in the back of my mind that this might hurt. And Todd, my VP, was aware of this is going to be a painful process from a financial perspective. But it really just came down to we didn't want to upend our whole environment. We have a system that works where everybody's very comfortable with it. It is kind of industry standard software, and so we were able to make that point that hey, it's expensive, but technology is expensive, and so we presented it that way. Our managed service vendor, ARX, Anthony mentioned them earlier. I talked extensively with them about it. They weren't making the jump, and I kind of let Alan be my guidepost with some things a lot of times. His advice was if you can afford it, stay with it, and we're able to afford it. If you look at Microsoft is constantly increasing prices on their 365 environment, and you hate it, but at the end of the day, what are we going to do? Are we going to switch everybody to LibreOffice or Google G Suite or something, or are we just going to cough up the money? And we coughed up the money.
Well, they kind of put you in a catch-22 situation, right? I mean, I think it was very interesting that you talked about Alan and what they were talking about, because I mean, we went to our vendor too that assists us and helps us, and they're very heavy in Nutanix. So I mean, it could really depend on the vendor that you dealt with. We certainly did not make the decision on our own. I think that would be, a hard decision to throw upward to C-level staff and executives, right? Hey, last year it was this amount, this year now it's going to be this much more, and their questions why. But I don't think that they really don't understand it in that situation. We were fortunate because we were at the end of a rope in order to replace hardware, so we were going to have to do it either way, right? But they don't understand the process behind it, so it's like just pay it. Otherwise, you're going to have to pay more than that to switch over. So.
Well, and I mean, they're used to seeing that OpEx number increase every year because VMware is not the only one moving to subscription models. Everything you do is moving to that model. So, seeing that increase in the MSTP for operational expenses, like it wasn't, they're used to seeing that increase.
Right.
It's not the first time that we've had to drop a bomb like that.
Yeah, after the Broadcom acquisition, I spoke with Devin and we looked at Nutanix and we looked at a couple other solutions. For us, it was really just because we weren't prepared for VMware to change pricing. We had our hardware alignment for replacing it wasn't aligned at all. So, we had a perfectly good SAN that had just been refreshed, so it was hard for us to make the plunge to Nutanix. But with that, I'm very interested in hearing this from both of you. We'll start with Devin, and I think it's going to be a whole lot easier question for Devin to answer. But I would like to know basically how long you're going with the hardware setup that you have. I mean, now that it's all in one, because like for Ben and me, and Tanner, our servers and SAN, they may not get replaced. And I didn't even think about what you mentioned earlier. Like, we didn't factor in this, but we've got fiber channel switches to let the stuff talk. I didn't include that when I was looking at Nutanix and the pricing and what it would save us or not. So you would have done Nutanix well to mention fiber channel switches are part of that cost. But anyways, I'm just curious, what's the time frame? And I know that our data can grow and that can change things, but what kind of life expectancy have you seen, and what do you expect out of your current hardware setup?
Well, we ran on the Cisco M5 hardware for like 6.5 years. So it's done well. We did, when we had to add another cluster, we did purchase Nutanix hardware about 4 years ago, and it's been running good. I mean, I don't see a reason to move away from it. I think it's Micro Semi is the hardware that they utilize. One cool thing that I like about Nutanix, and I'm sure there's an option in some of the advanced VMware functionality, but one of the cool things early on when we were utilizing it was, say the engineering team or another department comes to you and they have this massive project that they want to do, and you're going to have to add resources, right? So with Nutanix, they have a tool within there that you can actually run, and you can say, okay, here's my current environment. These are the number of hosts I have with the resources that I have. I'm going to have to add, four more virtual machines with these specifications. What does that make my environment look like, right? So from a resource standpoint, how much more CPU is that going to utilize? How much more memory is that going to utilize? How much more storage is that going to utilize? And do we need to add anything to that? Or is that going to put us over a certain threshold where we need to look at purchasing another host to throw into the stack to be able to add those resources? So that was one of the cool features. We actually did that with an MDM project with Meridian. They're our CIS/FIS vendor. And when they wanted to do the MDM project, I was able to run that capacity calculation and show it to my C-level staff and be like, look, if we implement this, that's going to put my CPU utilization at like 90%. And it was good to be able to have that paper to be able to show them and physically, because it helps you when you have to try to get more resources.
Yeah, that's interesting. VMware has a tool, and you have to pay for it extra. I'll say that, and that was before Broadcom, but it didn't seem to do everything that you mentioned, but it did quite a bit with the
Yeah.
performance and what it was looking like.
On the timeline, Anthony, like, yes, how long will we stay with the hardware we're with? I mean, I think that really, I don't know, man. I mean, we're contemplating some of the usage of the cloud. I know some of our OMS stuff is on-prem, and the way it seems is it's really going to have to stay there. But as far as our call center, we use WebEx Call Center now. As far as our on-prem Cisco Call Manager, I'm looking at migrating that to the cloud this year. We actually have our IVR center. Currently, we have physical boxes with it in our environment. I'm looking to move that to the cloud this year. So, I mean, I think it all depends on, like Tanner, when we were talking earlier, it was a disaster event. But still, if you're going to move stuff to the cloud, we have to make sure of, as far as stability, is going to be internet connectivity. And I mean, that's one of those things that you're just going to have to weigh from a business continuity disaster recovery plan. From the talks of it, it'd be really nice to where our MSRs, if something happened and they couldn't get to work and we moved Meridian to the cloud, have an instance of Meridian in the cloud, they can answer their phones from home and do everything they need to wherever they are that they have an internet connection. So, I mean, I think that's probably the future and the way to go, but the hardware is working right now and it's working great. It does kind of scare me because if you put everything up in the cloud and then all of a sudden you lose it. I'm one of those old IT people, man. I like putting my hands on my own data and I know where it's at.
I'm willing to bet we think alike on that, but we're both along the coast. And, I know Tanner got hit with Helene, and that was total devastation over there. But we get frequently we get hurricanes, and a lot of times that pushes me to think more of a cloud-based solution than on-prem in a lot of situations. But so that's interesting. Ben, I'm kind of curious with your hardware situation, what the age and life expectancy of some of your core systems that make up your VMware environment. I know we're all over the place with our infrastructure. As a rule of thumb, I like to say 7 years on a lot of stuff, but sometimes that doesn't happen. But anyways, I was just curious for your storage and your servers, what's the life cycle been like?
Yeah, that's what we try and run between a 5 and 7 year cycle. We normally about 5. Our co-op is building a new operations center, new service center, and that's which houses our main data center. So we are doing a data center migration in probably about 3 months or so. And so we made the decision we're putting all new hardware in this new data center because ordinarily the my current setup server storage are right about 7 years old at this point, and ordinarily I probably would have looked at replacing them last year, maybe year before even, but we knew this was on the horizon, and rather than having to move live hardware back and forth, we decided just to hold out on it. We managed to 1 year we bought some extra RAM and maxed out the RAM and all the host servers, and then another year we bought extra storage and maxed out the storage shelves and the arrays just to kind of help us. We purchased some really good service 4-hour extended service packages for everything, just to keep it all running. And right now it's fine. We haven't had knock on wood, I haven't had any trouble out of it. We tend to get as much life as we can out of our hardware, and we'll honestly, even the stuff that we have now in the primary data center, is some of it's going to roll down to our secondary data center once we take it out of rack. So yeah, we definitely get as much lifespan as we can out of it. It's funny you mentioned the cloud. We like to joke around saying, yeah, right now our job title is system administrator, but in 10 years, what's it going to be? Azure cloud associate? Like, I mean, what are we going to do? Everything's just going to be up in the cloud. You go in some places and it's just a network stack and everything's hosted. I think it really just comes down to how comfortable your leadership is with that idea, because there's always the fear, if I lose internet connection, we're dead in the water. But honestly, these days, if you lose internet connection, you're dead in the water anyway, no matter what. And so it tends, I think it probably tends to be more cost effective to host things sometimes than having an IT staff. Then also I think some leadership teams like to have a person they can talk to, like our CEO can come down the hallway and say, hey, I need you to look at this for me. And you don't necessarily get that if everything is hosted services. So, it's a trade-off one way or the other. But yeah, we certainly have been looking at cloud options. I would certainly like to offload some things.
We just bought our servers. I don't even know that they're 2 years old, and we're doubling the RAM in here in just a month.
We had looked at some different options. Like I even reached out to Tanner, and my predecessor reached out to Tanner and was like, you have a little bit of extra storage in your data center. Could we do something to where we kind of send a server your way and share it there? And we know we got hands and stuff we can trust in that environment. And then we'll do the same for you, like during a ice storm or something like that. As I did some of the math at looking at a colo location versus a cloud hosted solution, the cloud hosted solution really just worked out, and I don't have to pay for the hardware. All of that's taken care of. I don't have to replace the hardware. So we're hoping it's going to work out. It may change in 2 or 3 years. It changes so quickly, but that's kind of the route we're looking at now. The Azure ABS and going to push some stuff out there from a disaster recovery perspective and see how that works. But Nutanix has a product in the cloud too. I want to say it's HCX. I don't remember exactly the title for it, but we haven't looked at that, but we may utilize that as well.
Yeah, I mean, kind of shameless plug, I guess. For those that may not have heard it, we did an episode pretty recently on cloud versus on-premise, and I talked a little bit about that as both of you guys were speaking. The virtualization, you guys both talked about how, Devin, you're still on VMware, mostly on Nutanix. Ben, all on VMware at this point. Whether it's VMware going up or potentially Nutanix going up in the future, has virtualization, I guess, as a platform, and this is really to both of you guys, has it become much more important than we thought, if that makes sense? I think a lot of people, especially in our industry, if they see like a transformer go up in price, they say, well, it's just a transformer. It's what we got to pay nowadays. Has virtualization gotten to that point where, if Nutanix was to go up 2 times on you, Devin, are we to the point where this has become such a critical piece of our infrastructure? It runs really a core foundational part that we feel like it's something that we just have to do no matter what.
I would say absolutely, man. I mean, if you go back to before virtualization, right? If we look at all the applications that we have within our environments and we had to buy individual servers for those applications and spec them out with the requirements that they need, it would be catastrophic if one of those, went down. And if you had to replace that, do you have a spare server in place? You got to reload that server. I remember before virtualization existed, and when something went down, it took time to get it back up. Now I think all of us have backups in place and snapshots in place to where if something goes down, we can actually have it back up and running within an hour. I think that speaks for itself in regards to, virtualization and how important it is to us. I think when virtualization came out, we were all very surprised, like, oh, wow, what is this? It's almost kind of like when the iPhone came out. It was that different. But I definitely would say that it's changed the way that we do business and the way that we see our stuff going forward. I mean, what's the next big thing, right? There's going to be something that replaces that eventually.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you that it is a non-negotiable because we host 130 servers in our virtual environment, and I don't have room in my data center to have 130 physical servers, even if they're little 1U blade servers. I just don't have the room or the cooling power or any of it to host all of that. If we had to go back to physical servers, you're going to have a whole lot more servers pull in multiple duty. You're going to have that server that's your domain controller and your print server and your certificate authority. It's going to be pulling in the same thing with the vendors. Now, when a vendor or a software vendor approaches you with specs, it's like, oh, well, they need an application server and a database server and a test environment and a web server. It's like, well, if we had to virtualize that, I was like, well, we're trying to cram all that into one system, one server, instead of being able to spread it out. Your costs and your reliability are definitely going to take a major hit if you had to step away from virtualization. Now, you're right. There is, I'm sure there's something newer and greater coming out in the future, but there's certainly no going back, I don't think.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, I don't think we've done a good job as IT guys and gals kind of saying that enough, right? Like, especially in different businesses, different industries, obviously it's going to be different. If you're a sales, retail, establishment, you're going to have different things. But I think at this point, really, technology is foundational. And I don't think we've done a good job of saying how foundational it is and how critical it is to just day to day. We talk about new technology we get, but we don't always say, like, that stuff we bought 10 years ago, it's very critical now. And whereas I think in different parts and different departments, they do a better job of saying, this is just critical. These are the way the prices are. We buy something and then we're moving on and we don't talk about that thing anymore, if that makes sense. Devin, when you went to Nutanix, like, obviously you're not fully on Nutanix, you still got a few VMware things, but that was something new, right? And I think a lot of people, when they might be thinking of, do I want to go to something else? They're scared of, like, I don't know anything about it. So, like, can you talk to us a little bit about how was that? Like, how was that learning a new thing, and how similar was it? And did you pick it up really quickly, et cetera?
Yeah, so I mean, it's kind of like when we went to VMware originally. How scary is it that I'm going to have to now control all of my environment from one centralized location? It can't work, right? I mean, that's when we went to VMware originally, it was like, there's no way it's going to be this easy and we can do this. But I think by having the background of VMware and how vCenter works and how everything works inside of that, Nutanix is very similar to that. Prism elements and stuff, it's very, very similar. They have a Nutanix university that you can attend and that you can take classes on. But now the GUI is not the same, obviously, right? But as far as, creating a new host or powering on a host, powering off a host, or adding resources, or moving things, it's very similar to VMware. If you have experience in VMware and you understand the methodology behind what you're doing, it wouldn't take you long to switch over to that. That's my opinion.
We just spun up Proxmox for the AI server we're building, and it allows GPU pass through and all that. But it's different. But I think what you're saying is just the fundamentals. You get the fundamentals from VMware, and a lot of that does carry over. So, that's what we felt with Proxmox. I mean, we just dipped our toes into it, but that's how I would feel.
Yeah, it's kind of like when you went from Windows 95 to 2000. I mean, you knew what certain things did. You knew what control panel did. You just had to find where it was.
Yeah. One question I have for both of you, and I know a little bit about Ben just because we use one of the same providers that can assist with VMware, but I guess I would like to know what your guys' experience has been. We'll start with Ben. Like, have you used VMware support? And what's that look like? And then outside of VMware themselves, and I mean, obviously your own expertise, and maybe you guys don't need help, but once or twice a year. I guess I'd just be interested in what support looks like for y'all and what your experiences have been with just whoever you're using.
ARX handles pretty much all of the VMware heavy lifting. Like, if we don't know how to do it, they're going to do it for us. Now, I have had experience with VMware supports in the past in another role that I served, because I guess one thing about me is I hopped out of the co-op world for about 6 months and worked healthcare IT support, and then quickly realized that the grass is much, much greener back home, and came back to the co-op world. During that time, I did have to interact with VMware support, and I mean, I won't say it was better or worse than any other support experience I've ever had, but I will say, for what all we need, our vendor ARX does pretty much all of our support for us. I will say that I was very pleasantly surprised with our new Broadcom rep. when we had to speak to him about getting the numbers together and getting our pricing in. I will say that I was I was pleasantly surprised at his promptness and level of knowledge and level of support that he provided to us. It was better than I expected. So fingers crossed that uh, Broadcom's support of VMware will be good in the future.
With ARX systems, how has your support been with them, and how often do you think you're going to outside help?
That now say ARX is amazing. I mean, they do awesome for us. We would leverage them probably for something that's just not routine, because now with us, we don't utilize all of their services for everything, but they do our patching. So they come in once a month and they do our ESXi patches and everything for us. As far as having to reach out to them for something that's just like, hey, this is broken, I don't know how to fix it. Yeah, probably once or twice a year. They're amazing. If anybody doesn't know, they've been awesome. Like I said, I use them really as kind of a signpost for a lot of the decisions I make. Our support from them has been awesome.
Yeah, I think the big thing is for just whatever system you're going to is to make sure you know who to reach out to.
Right.
Devin, basically, I'd like to hear the same from you, and then also, if you don't mind, just elaborate on support and how often you're using it, what your support's like. And just because Ben touched on it, if you could talk about the patching process for Nutanix as well.
Yeah, sir. So, I mean, we're kind of in the same boat that Ben is. We have a third-party provider, eGroup Enabling Technologies, that helps us a lot. We have a service manager agreement with them. And so, I mean, we've never had an issue with Nutanix support. We can reach out to them directly. Nutanix does a really good job of identifying things that may be running in their environment. I don't want to say Maytag man, but almost like that. They let us know of issues that they see as they come up. We get an email. We can reach out to support and create a ticket. And then normally we'll reach out to eGroup and be like, hey, look, we saw this issue. We've created a ticket. We've looked at it. What are your thoughts? Is this something we need to do right away? Or is it something that they can help with? And they do, like in Ben's scenario, they help us with patching of this environment. We don't have a Nutanix certified professional on staff. They do provide training and certifications and stuff like that some of our staff members are looking at. But we work with eGroup on a lot of that stuff. They help patch in ESXi of the ones that we have. They help patch in the AHV environment that we have, AHV files, our CIF shares on there. So, I mean, they do some of that. Not that we couldn't do it, but I think that we're so busy with the day-to-day roles that we've got going on, they can jump on there and assist us with that. And they know how to do it like straight through. So I think it's a win-win having that third party that understands the environment and that, you can count on the call. I've heard many people, including yourself, Anthony, talk about Alan and his team, and knowing that you have that resource available, even with other cooperatives, right? Like cooperative community. I mean, that's what we do. Like if you have an issue, you can reach out to other co-ops and be like, hey, Tanner, hey, Anthony, hey, Ben, this is what I'm facing. I know you guys use this technology. What have you done, or have you seen this kind of thing? So, I mean, I think that's one thing, Ben. I know you said you were in the healthcare. I worked in healthcare for 12 years, and then I was in the finance side of things for 3 years. And I agree with you. Cooperative space is totally different, and you have those people that will help you and they want to help you.
One thing you said there was just, it was kind of interesting to me, and I wasn't aware of it. And let me just make sure I heard that right, Devin. So I'm just going to put it in a line with, so we use Pure for our storage, and they're monitoring that system. And if there's any hardware issues or anything like that, they reach out. Is that what you said Nutanix does?
Yeah. So we've had a couple instances to where we've had hard drive failures on the hosts. And honestly, we had an instance where a hard drive showed up at our office and we were like, why did we get this? And then when we go downstairs and look at the host, we see the yellow light on it and be like, oh, okay, we need to replace this hard drive and then ship it back.
That's a different concept. That's pretty interesting.
I thought I'd jump in and just kind of give a different perspective. So since I've been Blue Ridge 16 years now, we've never used a third-party vendor. So we've always directly went to VMware. So we haven't noticed really so far. I think over time as virtualization kind of matured, what we found is we actually just didn't call people that much. It's just gotten so rock solid that really it's rare that there's an issue. And if there is an issue, it's usually something simple that we fix. So I haven't noticed anything different on VMware support so far. Obviously, that may change. So I thought I'd give that perspective. But kind of to both of you guys, we'll start with Ben. Are you worried that, like, in the future, and then also to Devin, are you guys worried that, there's going to be future price increases, right? That this is going to be one of many. And then once he finishes, Devin, are you worried that, like, Nutanix is going to kind of see that, hey, there's a lot more money to be made here. Maybe we need to adjust our pricing. So, Ben, are you guys worried about that in the future?
Yeah, we are. I mean, it's certainly a concern, and I mean, I'm really hoping, that with this initial bust, that it's not going to be any major. I'm hoping we can rely on that, 10% yearly increase that you can pretty much count on for everything. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's certainly a concern, and we're always, I think part of the job is always to be evaluating what else is out there. There may be better products you can use. And like I said, I didn't find anything when we looked at Nutanix. I didn't find anything bad. It was just kind of one of those, we didn't want to shake up the system, but I did like their marketing campaign of, VMware, WHERE, where VMware, they would jump in there and do a lot of the heavy lifting of the migrating for you. Price increase is certainly a concern because I kind of get the feeling that Broadcom cares more about their Fortune 500 customers and not so much about their SMB, rural cooperative customers. So yeah, it's certainly a concern.
I think it's a concern for us too, but I think one of the things that, this showed everybody, right? Like everybody was on VMware. I mean, if you looked at it, it's almost like your desktop operating system, right? I mean, a good majority of people are on Windows, right? Yeah, Mac was out there, but a lot of people didn't use it from a business perspective unless you were doing, graphic design or something of that nature. So I think one thing this showed was that, yeah, everybody's on VMware, but there's another player in town, and you have options now where before you didn't necessarily have that. If you wanted to go virtualize your data center, then you had to go with VMware. Now you have a couple choices, right? It's not just Nutanix or VMware. Microsoft has a hypervisor and a couple others, but I definitely think the prices will continue to go up. I know when this hit, a lot of people did switch to a different hypervisor, from my understanding, just because of the cost increase. I agree with what Ben said. Again, some people don't have the money, they don't have the budget, they can't move. So, I mean, I think it all depends on your business model and where you're at. But I could see that it would affect the future of virtualization.
I did want to just shortly share my beginning virtualization experience, and it really wasn't a great one. I think it was about 2008, 2009. It was when I worked at Buckeye REC. And when I got there, they had physical servers, and we were at the point where we're having cooling issues. We couldn't keep the room cool. The electrical panel, like basically, we'd have to upgrade the circuit and everything. We just didn't have the capacity to add one more server. We were growing quickly from a technology wise, and I initially used Virtual Iron, and I don't know if anyone's even going to remember that, but honestly, it was VMware was what everyone knew, and Virtual Iron, it was basically a cheaper solution that really did everything that VMware did. Honestly, I loved it, used it for a couple of years. That's what I knew, and then Oracle bought them out. I thought Oracle was just buying them out because their virtualization, I'll just be blunt, it sucked. I can't remember what the name of it was, but Oracle's virtualization environment, it was just horrible. You didn't want to use it. And I thought they were just buying it to reuse it, and then, we have to just get support from Oracle. Well, no, they completely did away with it. Stopped supporting it and everything, and I had to switch to VMware. And so I'll be honest, that weighed in the back of my mind when we looked at Nutanix with VMware. It's kind of tried and true. The other thing I'll look at, this is there's two ways to I think there's pluses. I think there's pluses to all these different virtualization tools, and I think really just every organization's got to do what's best for them. But one thing I'll look at with Nutanix is just a thought, is just because they're not like the number one player out there, that, you don't ever hear of, when someone gets ransomware and gets all their data encrypted. I've yet to hear of, someone having Nutanix to get their virtualization environment completely encrypted. And on the flip side of that, being on VMware, like, I look at it just like a car. If you got a Porsche 911, if you have issues, it's gonna be hard to find help, and just people aren't gonna be as knowledgeable. I know it's not apples to apples, but with VMware, it's kinda like the Chevy truck. The parts are cheap and everyone knows how to work on it. I definitely think there are pluses to both, but, having a VMware environment, like, you've gotta be patching that system, or if you have some kind of security incident, they're gonna have your whole stack. Anyways, just wanted to share that real quick.
So, a question for both of you, and I think this is a good way to round out the episode. What advice would you give, Ben, to someone going through what you just went through and the decision you made? And then, Devin, same question to you. What advice would you give to the prospective person looking to move? What would you guys tell them if you could kind of, be on their shoulder as they were going through this process?
I would tell them to look at their environment, look at what their, because everybody's different. So I mean, look at your technology staff, what they're comfortable with, what tools you're using. Look at your backup solutions. Look at your whole stack, and see what's going to work best really for you. If it makes sense to buy some new hardware and switch gears and probably save some money in the long run, and you're at a point when you're comfortable switching gears like that, certainly look at some other options. If you're not willing to make that, you're able to afford the price increases, certainly don't change things just because of money. If you have the money to do so, don't change things just because of the cost of it. But obviously, if it's not cost effective for you, then certainly evaluate other options. I feel like there are other very good options out there. Like, so I don't want to be a staunch defender of VMware and say it's hands down the be all end all of things, because it certainly isn't. It's just, it's an industry standard. It's what we've been using. It's what we're comfortable on. We were in a position that we could afford to stick with it, and so that's what we did. But I'm certainly on the lookout for other things, and certainly if the level of service or product quality starts to decrease, that's one real big concern that I have. But part of that VMware acquisition was Carbon Black. We run Meridian SOC for their managed security services, and we have been running Carbon Black through them for the last several years. But they made the decision as a managed service provider to switch over to CrowdStrike, and we're following them. But yeah, we're going to convert our endpoint security to CrowdStrike, because we're already kind of seeing a dip in, Carbon Black has been on, kind of it's no longer the leader like it used to be. CrowdStrike's come along, and I think usurped their position as the top dog. And so if that starts to become evident that VMware is following the same path, they're not being ingenuous as they used to be, then it's certainly time to evaluate other options. So that is outside of the cost increase. That is my other real big concern here, is that hopefully the quality of the software of the product doesn't diminish.
Yeah, I think I would agree. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily always a monetary issue, right? I mean, you got to do what's best for the organization and what's best for the company and moving them forward from a technology standpoint. Now, all of us are in the positions to where they look at us to be able to identify and, come up with those solutions. And I think it's important that we do our research and be diligent to look at other options. I mean, I agree with Ben wholeheartedly. I mean, just because we're Nutanix now doesn't mean that that's what we'll be in the future. Things change, environments change, and things of that nature. So, I mean, I think it's important to, step back, take a look, especially, Ben, you brought up a good point right there, Carbon Black, right? We're a Carbon Black user as well. And I mean, trying to get the licensing, we had to renew our Carbon Black here in the past month. And trying to get the license from Carbon Black to renew it was a pain. I mean, even our vendor, It took 3 weeks to get a new quote to get carbon black quoted for us. So, I mean, it wasn't something to where we had a decision we could go with something different right away, but it may be something next year when it comes up for renewal that we look at, a different product. And I think depending upon what hypervisor you end up going with or virtualization you end up going with could determine what other products you use within your environment. Because some of them may work with it, some of them may not. And I think, everything runs an agent now. I mean, oh my gosh, you got to add 16 gig to everybody's workstation for all the agents that they've got running on these machines, right? So, I mean, I definitely think it could change. But Tanner, I think to better answer your question, I mean, sometimes money can't be an issue. I mean, and the reason I say that is because as we work in the cooperative world that we do, we work in a field to where if the power goes out, that's a big concern. And a lot of things now rely on the technology that's provided within the co-op. And, you hear of all these instances with ransomware, and EISAC puts out all these notices all the time about things happening within, cooperative and the critical infrastructure and CISA and all this stuff. I mean, CrowdStrike is a great, we were not a CrowdStrike user. I know Anthony and his team were. And, that when I heard about that, that one incident hit so many people and caused so much disruption that what if someone out there did that on the virtualization side? So I think if you have only one product, it's going to be easier for that person to infiltrate and cause havoc, to where if you have multiple things, really it's a business case use scenario. What's best for the business? That could be another discussion. I mean, that could go on that could be another podcast, right?
Part 2 maybe right there.
There you go.
Anthony, any final thoughts from you guys, your perspective?
Just a common trend I've seen from both of you, and I'm happy to see it. And I think this is important for people in the industry, and especially for people in leadership positions, is just to, not be so ingrained that you won't look at other solutions. I've seen Ben and Devin, they keep an open mind and will, aren't going to go down with a solution if it loses functionality or reliability and stuff. So, anyways, that was something I noticed from both of you, and I think it's interesting, and I think that's why you guys are in the positions you're in.
Yeah, I'm working on a leadership presentation actually for we do a class where there's people that are earlier on in their career, right? They're kind of learning what we do, and then obviously trying to learn more from a leadership perspective. And one of the things that it was kind of like, what does leadership mean to me? One of the big proponents that I really behind is the best idea needs to win, right? And I think every one of y'all just hit that, right? Which is the best idea of VMware for you? If it is, and that's the one that needs to win. And if it's the best idea for whatever reason, for your company is that you need to move to something else, then that's what you need to go to. Guys, we really appreciate you being on the podcast. I think you both brought some awesome perspective for our listeners and for those viewing. Just a lot of like good ideas on what to look for, things to think about as they're going through this decision and potentially a transition themselves. So we just appreciate both of you being on. For our listeners, we really appreciate you as well. If you want to reach out to us, feel free to reach out to us at showitoffthewirepodcast.com. We're always looking for episode ideas or just feedback. You can always reach out to us on social media as well. Our episodes are released every other Monday, and this has been another great episode of Off the Wire.